The COB is brought to you by Pepperstone, trusted by traders in over 160 countries. From Barangaroo Studios, here's what you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Well, hello. Nice to have you here with us for the COB, the 17th of June, us being myself, Nadine Blaney.
And I'm Tessa Arcilia. Good to see you with us.
Yeah, so today wasn't the best start to the week that I've ever seen, and particularly post 2 p.m. we had quite a lot of sellers moving in, Tessa.
Yeah, we have. So now looking at the COB, we still have a few minutes before the market settles, but down by almost 0.5% there. I think the ASX is around the same mark as well. Yes, around a third of a percent down for the ASX, but then we'll give a market check again later. And Nadine, this is interesting for me because, you know, the main focus has actually been outside of Australia.
Yeah.
And it's my old stomping ground. It's something that, you know, following throughout the weekend. So it's interesting for me to see that a lot of the movement or non-movement was you know, influenced by Europe and
tell
China.
us, France. So what's happening there? Like, what's the status update? Because we had a few conversations today just then with Longview Economics, which is up online if you'd like to listen to it. Alistair McLeod, if you'd like to hear his take on what this means, you know, for an Australian investor in France. But Tessa, yeah, to
and
your
Sean
point.
Hickman as well also talked about that today. And I think it's because it's all hanging in the balance because, you know, the French system, so they're going to be voting again, but the French system is designed in such a way that usually the centrist parties win at the second round. So you've got, you know, center left, center right. And I've read a few commentaries saying that because they usually band together in the second round to stop someone from what they deem as the fringes to be in the middle. And then now it seems like the support, they will no longer be there for the centrists. So that's actually something we haven't seen in France before. So
Now,
it's making
forgive my
service.
ignorance, but when do we get the final, like when is the actual voting being held? When's the
Oh,
election
we have to
held?
check the dates. I'm sorry, but it'll be about, I think, a week so you've got one vote, and then a week later you've got the second vote. So then we'll find out.
Okay.
And usually someone like Marine Le Pen, she's made it to the second round a few times. So her party has gotten stronger and stronger over the years. So
Yep. All right.
yeah,
So
that
that's what's
support.
happening in Europe as we make, well, European markets are up and running. And yeah, we've got a lot of pressure coming on in the euro. No big surprise there. But when it comes to the three themes here locally, China connection, and that's sort of a double-edged sword because we had that China data coming out. So disappointing, generally speaking. Just had a couple of great chats about the China data, but also we've got the Premier here. We've got candid talks, we're told, being held between the Prime Minister and the Chinese Premier. It's the first visit to the country by a Chinese official in 7 years. And yeah, there's plenty on the agenda, and of course, trade really top of mind as well.
It is a big deal, and I just saw a headline. Of course, it's great to see the detail behind, especially the political aspects that they've raised, but they said that relations are back to normal or something like that. So that would be interesting to see from a trade point of view, if that actually does carry through.
And we've got gold, I suppose, being the standout sector in terms of the local market today, because the big miners, you know, if you look at iron ore miners, they're coming under quite a lot of pressure. So we'll continue to get you across some of those stories in just a moment. And then we've got Tabcorp turn. It was a new CEO being announced for Tabcorp. It's been under quite a lot of pressure in terms of its listed company performance. So Gillon McLachlan from the AFL.
That's interesting because do you bring an outsider with a completely different perspective that could probably change the company if needed? And I see some analysis already with what experience does he have? Well, we'll see. Maybe an outside experience might be good.
Yeah, well,
we'll
sometimes
see.
you need a dramatic change before anything happens. And obviously he would be very well connected from his time at the helm at the AFL.
There you go.
All right, miners, to the point, we've got BHP, we've got Rio Tinto. I mean, it's a tough day on the market when you've got these guys down to this extent. We've got iron ore coming under a pressure, particularly in the wake of that Chinese data, because nothing really structurally happening there to get consumer demand up. You know, retail sales did bounce, but industrial output was lower, and no good news from the property sector
and
there
you had
either.
a chat with Gary, and he kind of said, well, it's neither good nor bad. It's kind of what we've seen from a Chinese trajectory point of view, all right?
I don't know what's wrong with tech today, but it's not looking good.
Oh, right.
No, I mean, like, Wisetech is down by 3.7%.
Do you think it's the anticipation? I don't know, for interest rates. It's how that plays into the market, expectations of what
Just looking if there's anything specific. There's no news specifically, and we saw the Nasdaq at a record high. Perhaps it's a bit of profit taking because they have been doing quite well if you're a Wisetech and a Zero as of late.
Yeah.
So that's the tech sector, and then we've got industrials coming under a lot of pressure. Their 7 Group is actually one of the worst performers today from what I saw a little bit earlier on. So look, let's go to Kyle Rada, shall we? He is joining us from capital.com to give us his take on market performance today. Start there with the ASX, Kyle. This was not a great start to the week.
Yeah, and a bit of a drop into the close as we saw, I think, a little bit more activity in futures markets, as well as obviously the start of European trade today as well. So, I mean, I think the story roughly is that we're seeing Asian markets follow some of the weakness that was seen in Europe on Friday night. There's a sort of a cyclical element there too, where the weakness is to be found. I mean, obviously we didn't see it quite as much on Wall Street. It was a little bit more sluggish over there. But nevertheless, that combined with the fact that there seems to be a bit of a mixed response to the Chinese data today, we did see the material sector a fraction lower after that data came out at around midday. Just a really kind of damp start to the week, I suppose. So looking reasonably negative. Looks like we're going to close pretty much around the lows of the day, the ASX 200. A bit of outperformance from the defensives as well. Again, not a big day's trade by any means, but certainly one that's sort of marked the start of the week in a risk-off fashion.
Yeah, so on one side we have the Chinese data itself, but Kyle, have you been following, I suppose I'm sure you have been, the visit of Li Chang to Australia? What do you take from that and in translating it into the trade relations between the two countries?
Yeah, I suppose nothing tremendous from a broad market perspective, but I mean there's a thawing of tensions obviously, and we've got a very multicultural office here at capital.com, and one of my Chinese colleagues turned around to me at around 2:30 today and said, you don't need a visa anymore to visit me, and we said, oh great, well we're friends again. So that was that's obviously an element of kind of thawing tensions, and clearly a part of the very different diplomatic approach that the Albanese government has taken to China compared to obviously the previous coalition government. There was also a very funny image going around on social media too, that one of the items on the menu today at the Premier League's lunch was Australian rock lobster, which is one of the products still caught by Chinese tariffs at the moment as well. And apparently there's some talk there of perhaps removing some of those trade restrictions further to grease the wheels of commerce too. So, I mean, there isn't any kind of, again, broad-based market impact of this today, and probably won't be in general. In fact, the trade war, generally speaking, if you wish to phrase it, that hasn't had a really significant impact again across the market as a whole. But there's certainly some pockets of the market that is sensitive to it. Clearly it's a very fraught geopolitical environment globally right now. So any sort of diminishing of I suppose regional political tensions between Australia and China is a welcome thing too. So all's well, it would seem at the moment, or it's certainly improving. And again, as my colleague informed me today, I might be able to go visit him for his wedding and not require a visa.
Well, that's always nice, isn't it? Okay. But the data, what it has done is put pressure on the big miners here, and that took a big chunk out of the market too, didn't it, Kyle? But then you've got gold on the other hand, in relation to all this fraught, political climate in many parts of the world doing quite well.
Yeah, there really was a sort of a classic defensive cyclicals element to market action today. As we spoke about before, the areas of the market that perform well were sort of utilities and telcos, and then we saw some of that weakness coming through riskier areas of the market like IT, and then also energy and materials underperforming. As you just alluded to as well, around that midday data release that we got, which most pertinently saw a bit of a miss in fixed asset investment as well as industrial production. The miners did, the material sector as a whole did come off right around that time, retraced some of those losses to some extent, but certainly has been on the back foot throughout the day. And it just continues to speak to this very slow, disappointing, and maybe even frustrating recovery in China. Very, very much lukewarm economic conditions coming through the data there. Flip side of that, though, there was a pocket of strength in the material sector in the ASX today, and it was the gold miners. And you always, as a kind of general rule of thumb or as an interesting signal, when you see moves like we did on Friday where gold was rallying with the US dollar, it typically means that gold has become a bit of a safe haven play, normally tied to some kind of political risk across the globe. And in this instance, of course, it's to do with what's going on in Europe. And, some of these concerns around, not just, the policy impacts that maybe, a different composition of French Parliament will have, but also that there does seem to be that kind of restoration, or, well, probably not the right word, but a renewal, I should say, of fears that basically disappeared since the pandemic of, the longevity of Europe, existential risks to Europe, the rise of Eurosceptic parties, and the sort of subsequent dysfunction that can come from that, from just a policy point of view, but also, again, the sort of existential risks to Europe, at least on the margins that has. So gold did rally on Friday night on the basis of that. So the gold miners performed reasonably well today, despite the weakness in the other parts of the material sector.
Okay, well, looking at policy setting, we've got a big week for central banks, right? I think you said 8 this week, 7, 8. So anything out of what's expected, Kyle, for you? And I heard a lot of podcasts this morning trying to figure out who's going to cut first. What's your take?
Yeah, it doesn't look like any moves from, we're following most closely S&B, BOE, and of course the RBA. The BOE and RBA look like they're going to stand pat with policy. First and foremost, RBA, the next 24 hours, really it's going to be a commentary about how the RBA is sort of digesting these signals of, persistent, maybe even accelerating inflationary pressures, and maybe as well as some discussion about the not just the recent data, but the recent budget, which came out after the last RBA meeting and the last statement of monetary policy, could affect underlying inflation in the economy. There was an interesting article released by the AFR last week that, using freedom of information, was able to pick up basically some modelling from the RBA to suggest that the most recent budget was on balance probably inflationary in nature, which obviously goes to suggest that some of these inflationary pressures that we are seeing in Australia, underlying that is a criticism that potentially the cash rate could be a little bit too low still, might keep inflation at these kind of uncomfortably high levels and above target. So getting some of that information about how the RBA sees the current state of the economy and changing macroeconomic fundamentals and what that could mean for policy down the line is going to be crucial. We do have the markets creeping forward again as to when that first rate cut could come from the RBA. Otherwise, the Bank of England will be the other interesting one, although it's another one that's sort of tied into that kind of fraught political dynamic at the moment, because obviously we've got elections there in the next 3 or 4 weeks, not expected to move policy, but certainly dealing with much more complicated politics as well as macroeconomics with much, still very, very weak growth. Some inflationary pressures, albeit they're sort of subsiding as well. So again, it's going to be another big week for policy. This last 2 or 3 weeks has been kind of very much driven by policy, as we had the the ECB, obviously the Fed last week as well, and the BOJ. But yeah, in the next few days, it doesn't look like we'll get any central banks cutting interest rates, but of course, we're going to be looking out for any signs as to when that could occur from some of these major central banks and how they balance the risks. Now some of which political, but certainly inflation versus signs that in at least Europe and Australia, economic activity is pretty weak despite inflation remaining above target.
All right, so we will watch and we will wait. Kyle Rada, Capital.com. I hope you enjoy the sunshine it looks like there in Melbourne. Yeah. Have a good one.
Thanks.
We'll speak soon.
Kyle.
You too.
Okay, let's get across some of the corporate stories. Look, there hasn't been a lot, but we did have Tabcorp repricing some of its debt, I do believe. Pilot Energy. We'll be speaking with the CEO, Brad Lingo, tomorrow. Pilot Energy, again, has got the go-ahead to, I don't know all the details, but to do something specific in Western Australia. So we will bring you all of the details, but it had a great day today.
Capital Health, this one's a big one. After, that takeover bid from Integral Diagnostics. I just saw news. So Integral Diagnostics creates $1 billion diagnostics giant. So that.
Yeah, there was a bit of M&A activity as well. Scroll Group was also looking pretty good. I don't think Superloop is up by 143%. I could be wrong. But I do think that might have been a bit of there might be a little bit of a data error there. And Tabcorp, of course, is up in the wake of its new, there we go.
There we go.
And its new CEO, Gillon McLachlan, being picked. All right, so Kashi was joined today by Mathan Somasundaram from Deep Data Analytics and Gaurav Sodhi from InvestSmart.
it's one that I've been keeping an eye on, and I think that's probably where it's going to be. I think we're going to still keep an eye on it, but I don't see the reason to jump in yet. You want to see some traction play out. So at the moment, I think it's still a hold.
So they've got a whole bunch of retail outlets of an old technology stack that's been asked to compete with a whole bunch of new high-tech competitors, and they're not competing very effectively. Look, I don't mind saying that I own stock in PointsBet, which is a new competitor. I've only I bought that in after they sold off their US business, and I think there's a more tractable investment case with PointsBet than there is with Tabcorp. So if I own this, I would sell Tabcorp and move over to PointsBet.
Well, there you go. Not a lot of love there for Tabcorp coming from our guests there today. So leaders, Tessa, let's take a look.
Okay, top of the leaderboard is Sigma Health. Is there some news there, or is it a defensive side? We've seen some gains in healthcare today.
Well, no, Sigma, it got really battered and bruised last week when the ACCC raised some concerns about, some of the Chemist Warehouse sites. So Shaw today saying that the merger still looks doubtful because of those competition concerns, but I just think today was a little bit of perhaps opportunistic buying there. Capricorn Metals is up by close to 4%. It's seen its share price lifted 0.5% to $6.53 by Bell Potter, saying that, look, it's looking pretty good, I suppose, in their view. Red 5 as well. It's a broker note that helped lift it today. Nanosonics and Telix can't say any news, but Telix, you remember, was battered toward the end of last week when it did say that it would be abandoning its plans for its U.S. listings.
Probably a swing and back up there. All right, let's look at the laggards on the other end of the board. Arcadium Lithium there. Not surprising with lithium as a sector taking a hit. Paladin Energy also down. A2 Milk down 4.5% almost. Any news in A2 Milk?
No, can't see any news for Fletcher or Seven as well. Remember I mentioned Seven was one of the worst performers. So and sort of a lackluster day when it came to a lot of the corporate news out there in the small to medium cap space. Let's take a look. No, maybe. There we go, Drop Suite. Wow, there's some gremlins in our data today. Let's not talk about that. But Capital Health on that M&A. There was Schroll Group as well, looking to be taken over. So interesting to see the activity there. Yeah,
and laggards Winsome Resources down 14.2%. Delta Lithium, again, that's not surprising. Berkeley Energia, Wagner's Company, and Gold Hydrogen all down.
Okay, so tonight, what we are looking forward to, the U.S. Empire State Manufacturing read. However, we are also getting, guess what? The FOMC has happened, so we're getting a whole bunch of Fed speakers out tonight. So we do get, Williams, where's my news story gone? Williams, I can't remember who else it is off the top of my head. I had it here. Anyways, it's at least 3 Fed speakers, so they will put some meat on the bones of what's going on in terms
Cook will
of...
also speak.
There we go.
Overnight. So indeed, we'll just keep an eye out for that because that will give us context into obviously what the Fed is thinking. All right, day ahead tomorrow, big day, RBA interest rate decision. Do stay with us for our live coverage of that tomorrow.
Yeah, and we will also be listening in to Governor Bullock. So when the media conference is held, that starts at 3:30 Sydney time. And we also get an investor briefing from Beach Energy and Premier Investments trades ex-dividend. So we've got a whole host of really great guests coming up for you tomorrow. We do hope that you can join us then. Quick check-in on where the S&P ASX 200 did finish. That's the CIBO Australia index on your screen, so pretty negative, down by 0.4%. Selling from 2 p.m. onwards, the S&P ASX 200 off by 0.3%.
Yeah, 0.3%.
So 7,700, a nice round number there.
Yeah, the sector 6 of 11 sectors ended higher on the SX, but a lot of red for the main, so IT, energy, materials, all down, as we've been saying.
So tomorrow we've got another host of great guests. If you've missed anything today, I do encourage you to go online and listen to these interviews at ausbiz.com.au. And if you're listening to this in podcast form, we'd love it if you could leave a review.
So others can
find
the
show notes.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us today, and join us again tomorrow. See you then.
The COB is brought to you by Pepperstone, trusted by traders in over 160 countries.
Gil.
Oh, hey, Ken.
Here we go.
You still trading?
Pepperstone. Trusted in over 160 countries. You?
Well, I'm still with...
I don't think anyone trusts them.
No, I'm fine with it. Just like I'm fine with my trusty coach. 1980s John McEnroe.
Pathetic! Horrible! 1980s, huh? So, really temperamental?
Keeps me on my toes.
Awful! It's a bit intense.
Be better.
Still fine with it.
Use your racket.
He's just staring at us.
Yeah, sometimes he yells and then sometimes he just stares.
Is he aiming for your face, Gil?
He's fine with it.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to hit you.
Fine with it.
Don't be fine with it. Switch to Pepperstone, trusted by traders in over 160 countries.
Come on, you cannot be serious.
Don't do that.
Ow.